Well, this week we're still working on block systems, but one of the commenters here on the channel pointed out something very interesting, that Atlas has always offered an electrical system, a modular electrical system. Gee, I think it came out like back in the 1950s. I used it on my very first railroad in 1965. But it's a really simple way to understand electrics for your railroad, especially block control. This is the book that explains their system. It's there on their website. It's been in publication. Well, I believe the very first edition was actually carved in stone tablets, but it's still printed. It's still relevant. And one of the really cool things about this Atlas system is even if you choose not to use the Atlas system, understanding the Atlas system is to understand how block switching works. So it's a great way to even learn how block switching works just by studying these various components and reading this book. Here's their web page where they sell the various components. At the top there you can see the URL if you want to go looking for this. But these are the various components that they sell for doing model railroad electrics, electrical control, and block switching. Now there on the top row you can see the snap relay. We'll talk about these other components, not the snap relay, but we talked about the snap relay when we were talking about automatic reversing loops, because if you simply need a double pole, double throw, 12 volt activated relay, that's a great one, and the price is really affordable and super easy to understand and use. It's based on their switch machine. It's almost exactly the same thing, only it's a switch machine that's been turned into a double pole, double throw relay. Now, this is kind of the heart of the system. It's the 0220 controller, and because we're doing AB cab block controls, both of your power supplies hook up here. So the DC power out on one of your power supplies connects here. This will be your A cab. And the other DC power supply, the track output, hooks up down here. This will be the B cab. Remember that this only works if you're using two completely separate power supplies or a dual throttle power supply that's totally separated inside. If you're using a common transformer, this is not going to work. It'll all short out. We talked about that last week. Last week we also talked about common rail. When you're using this kind of switching, one of your rails is common across your entire railroad. So you can see here the black rail has no gaps in it. It's just one constant rail, and it doesn't matter how big your railroad is. One of the two rails has no gaps in it, and it's connected to one of the two outputs on each of your two power supplies, which are joined together and then tied to the common rail. If you're using the Atlas controller, that happens internally. So after you've hooked your two power packs up to the inputs of this, there's an output right here that goes to your common rail. So that's pretty simple. So you simply tie a wire here, run it entirely under your railroad following the track plan. That will be your common rail bus. And then any drops that you put down from that rail to that bus is done to that wire. On my railroad, I'm using the black wire. And it all ties up to the common rail junction. When I was a kid, I used this system on my railroad, and it was brilliant. Today I'm not using it. I'm simply taking one each of the outputs of my two power supplies, tying those together and hooking that to the black rail. Now the principal function of the controller is that it gives you a reversing loop switch. And for that reason, these two red switches take the place of the direction switch on your power pack. So you no longer use the direction switch. You simply set that in one direction and forget it. And then from that point on, direction is controlled by these two red switches for cab A and cab B. And as I mentioned before, this gives you a reversing loop switch. And we've talked at length in previous videos about how to do reversing loops. So we won't go into that now. But if you're using this controller, then this switch controls the polarity of your reversing loop. And the reversing loop, of course, being a completely isolated section of track on a balloon track or something like that, ties up to these two terminals right here, to both the black rail and the red rail. The polarity there doesn't really matter because you're going to change the polarity, and the polarity changes with the gray switch here. And that's controlling the polarity and therefore direction of travel through your reversing loop. Now, of course, you can see that this only gives you one reversing loop. So Atlas's suggestion here is if you're going to have multiple reversing loops, simply tie them all together to this one switch, and then make sure you're not trying to reverse two trains at the same time in two different reversing loops. And that way, all of your reversing loops are controlled by the gray switch here. Now you can run your reversing loop from either cab, cab A or cab B, and that is selected here with the green switch. So you can throw that to A if you want your reversing loops to run from cab A, or B for cab B, of course. Now the output of the controller are these two sets of connectors here, and you can connect directly to the track, but it's sort of ill-advised. What they want you to do is run the output of this through the 215 block selector. This consists of 4 single-pole double-throw switches with a center off position, and then you can connect all of your individual track blocks to these switches. And this simply attaches to the end of the selector. They butt right up against each other, and then they sell a little spade lug that will tie them electrically together. You'll notice it only ties one of the two terminals because the other one is the common rail. So these 4 terminals now run off to the isolated rail, the single rail in each of the 4 blocks that you want to control. The other rail, of course, still being connected through the common rail. So now we have 4 switches that can operate 4 different blocks. You put the switch in the up position to tie to the A power pack, down to the B power pack, or in the center to kill power to that block entirely. And if you have more than 4 blocks, as is quite often the case, then you can just keep ganging these block controllers together, adding as many as you need. Now, Atlas offers a couple of other interesting products. They call this the Twin, and it's a double pole, double throw switch that simply reverses the polarity at the output. So you can connect polarity to the left side over here, and then the switches will control the polarity at the outputs here at the top, switching them back and forth as you throw the switch. Great for reversing, say, a turntable motor or even a reversing loop or something like that. But anytime you just simply want to switch the polarity of a voltage. And here too, they can be ganged together from the other side of the switch. Now, for what it's worth, the Twin used to be much larger. This is an older version of the Twin. You may run into these older ones on eBay or something, and if you're using the smaller one, you probably don't want to go over to using one of these larger ones. So watch out for that. They also offer this. They call it simply the connector. It's an on-off switch. That's all it is. You hook up power to the spade lugs over here. You can gang those together, same as the other kinds of modules that they offer, and it just functions as an on-off switch. They suggest using it for turning your lights on and off. And this little item, this is a classic. These have been around forever. This is the switch machine controller by Atlas. It runs their switch machines. It will work with any solenoid based switch machine. Very few people use solenoid switch machines anymore that click clack. They use stall motors. But if you're using solenoids, most classically the Atlas switch machine, then this switches right and left, and then you activate it by pressing in on the button. It's a push button. So you put it in the position that you want your switch to be in, and then you press the button and you hear clack from the railroad, knowing that the switch machine just threw, and you know that your points are now properly aligned. At any rate, this is not some sort of paid promotion for Atlas electrical controllers. They don't even know that we're doing this. But somebody brought up in the comments that this is a really slick way of wiring your railroad if you're not up on exactly how to do it from your own switches and that sort of thing. But as I learned how to wire my railroad using these components, it is a great educational tool because once you figure out how these things are working, then you're ready to jump ahead and buy your own single pole, double throw center off toggle switches and wire your own blocks and that kind of thing. At any rate, we will continue talking about block wiring and block control. And I hope you want to follow along with that. So if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe. And you can do that by clicking on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Sunday because Karen and I have something fun. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.